All right, let's continue on with something a little bit different now. Let's focus on the background. The background is this turbulent cloud system, plasma noise. We want to animate that too. Now I have two different versions of it, and we can use those to interact with each other through displacement. We can have one displace the other. So for instance, I'll use this one to displace this one, and so this one is the one that's currently in the animation. 99 frames, and they're all the same frames. I can go to the filter. Oops, that's the wrong option. Filter, displace. So there's a couple of displacement options here. Let's take a look at the first one. And you see how this can be used to create some sort of turbulent cloud. We may need to flip it upside down if we want it to go more upwards, like rising clouds from an explosion or smoke or something like that. But it's a good start. There's another one that's also quite impressive. They all have their relative strengths and uses. There is a pool displace, which I like a lot. And by default, it's around there and there. So you have this option here. Now you can change the direction, the max displace. Yeah, something like this would be useful. The key is to not have it applied across the entire sequence with the same amount, right? So this is interesting, but it's not what we want if we want to animate it. Because if we animate it here, it's still going to be the same amount across each of them, right? So what I need to do, perhaps first of all, is I'm going to store this because I may experiment. Let's go and store this here. And let's go, instead of using the static filter, which applies across each of the frames, but not with a change in the parameters, instead of doing that, what I can do is use the timeline. So in the animation timeline, you can go apply a displacement. There's a couple of combine with swap, there's compositor swap, and there, down there, displace by swap. There's three of them here. The displace option, let's go use that one first. So here we can adjust how much, and we can adjust and keyframe how much displacement we want across the timeline, right? And that's the key thing if you want to, pun intended, that's the key thing if we want to change it. So I'm going to go with 0 displacement at first and keyframe that, and then go to the end and give it the maximum. Keyframe that. Right, and this is sort of a spline interpolation. I might do this here to disable the spline, so it's a straight line, and apply. So now you see it's applying that amount of displacement that changes over the entire animation. And so we have now an animation that looks a little bit more like this. Let's play it. There you go. Now again, this is kind of a down diagonal draft. Maybe we prefer to have it up. So let's go flip it vertical. Flip image menu, flip vertical. And then that way it will be more into the upper right. Right, a little bit more of the upwards trend. And there are a few other things we could possibly want to do there. Perhaps in fact rotate it, but for that we would need to make sure it is tileable or seamless. So let's do that. Let's give it a seamless, make seamless, perhaps a little bit more, something like that, across the entire animation. And so it's still going at about 45 degrees upwards, and what we can do now at this point is use the transform filter, and in here you can rotate it at about 45 degrees and then also make it tiled. Right, and so now that way, because it's seamless, you won't see the edges, and that should now, what used to be 45 degree will go up vertically and animate that. So that's a little bit more the area that we want to be with regard to the flow of things. There's a couple of other techniques. Another technique would be to animate it with the other mechanism. In fact, we can combine it. We could use this one here still to displace it further. Let's go and go back to the timeline, and this time we'll use the third option, the pool displace, and this one has some interesting merits too. the amount of displacement here. And so here we see it will basically introduce sort of a different direction, and maybe that'll be interesting because it will look like there are different forces at work here, right? Some wind going up, some wind going blowing sideways. Let's go and keyframe that. Go from here to the end, and perhaps a slightly different strength on that. It doesn't really need a whole lot. Because it already has its own turbulence to begin with, and apply that. All right, so we now have, well, this one's a little bit too detailed. It has this ripple effect here. That's probably not what I wanted. So let's go and undo that. If I was clever, yep, I did have the save undo checked. So I have all these images from the prior. I can undo that and get back to the one here before. Anyway, there's a couple of other ways to have one image sequence, one animation displaced by another and make it appear like an animation, meaning make it appear like the image that is displacing it is in itself animated, right? And so we've worked with the tools to do that when we composited, when we combined the dragon with the oh, that's the small one. When we combined the dragon with the background, and we had it flagged as the animated swap image. So the trick is to have one of those, and then flag it as as the animated displacement. So here's one that's not animated yet. We could actually animate it in itself. Let's make it seamless again. So we can simply shift it sideways, and that will be one animation sequence. So let's say we want to make it seamless like this, 21, 21. And once we have that, we will store it. Animation, store animation to disk. So we have this one animation that's seamless. It's not moving much yet, so we actually don't need to store this one. What we need is to move that, transform, shifting it, and maybe this one will go sideways. So we'll simply do, but this one is not a static shift by the same amount. Again, this one is one where we need a timeline. So let's use the timeline to transform with the shift option. There you go. And because it's seamless, it's not going to reveal the edge, and so we can go from, I don't know, something like this here, keyframe that for the first location, and then go to the end and move it this way. Right? It doesn't need a lot of movement. Apply that, so we simply have a slight movement to the side. Okay, so now that one we will store, animation store, and that gives us our first moving sequence, store to disk. The trick is now to have another one, so I'm going to use the other one that's, where is it, this one here, and create an animation of the same duration, 99 frames. There you go. And I'll do something similar with this one. I'll give it a shifting movement. I'll first make it seamless. Make seamless, there it is. Maybe this one I'll use the default values. And once I have that seamless sequence, I will move it just the same way as I did for the first one. And this one also with the timeline. So go to the transform, 1, 2, 3, and transform or shift. This one I'm actually also going to make a little bit bigger and smaller, so I'm going to change the scale. Initially it'll be smaller. I need to tile it. Since it's seamless, it's not going to reveal the edges. I'm going to go something like this size initially, and a little bit to the side as well, or maybe a little bit down. There. Keyframe that to the beginning, and up to here it will be only moving a little bit to the side, or maybe a little bit down even. There you go. But then here we'll suddenly, maybe it's an explosion, right? So we'll see what happens if we have a sudden burst on that, and keyframe that.